the primitive forms of artificial intelligence we already have proved very useful.
AI is a golden opportunity.
How do we ensure that this technology is regulated?
The long arc of technological history is now in an extraordinary new phase.
The AI6 Podcast with Joanne Sweeney.
Michael O'Kane here for our Thursday digital download, and once again joined on the line with Joanne Sweeney. How are you doing this morning, Joanne?
I'm great, Michael.
Thank you so much for joining us, Joanne. And a bit of a complex issue we're going to be talking about this week, but we're talking about parasocial relationships when it comes to our relationships with our chatbots. So I suppose, Joanne, just to kind of kick off this conversation, why do you think this becomes such a public conversation?
Well, you know what? The term parasocial was actually coined back in 1956 when people became emotionally attached to TV presenters and actors and celebrities that they didn't know. But it was kind of came back into vogue, I guess you could say, in 2025, which dictionary named it Word of the Year because it included the AI age, because we now all have access to AI chatbots. So it's a one-sided relationship with an AI chatbot because we are increasingly using them for emotional advice and for conversation.
And it's a funny one, isn't it, Joanne? Because as we've kind of seen in recent years, I know last week, we were talking about Hollywood when it comes to their attitudes to AI and using it to kind of revive deceased actors. But what we're talking about here more specifically is the public use of AI, especially on chatbots. I can tell you an example. I was actually just talking to somebody off air about this, one of my colleagues, about on Instagram, the kind of AI influencers, so to speak, and how those are becoming more prominent. Why do we think, one, these kind of AI influencers are becoming more prominent, but why do you think they're clicking with such an online audience?
Well, this is quite serendipitous that you've had that conversation, because I was at an event yesterday and the presenter told us that there are 55 million AI influencer accounts on Instagram, and many of them are making money.
Wow.
So they are obviously the likeness of a person. They obviously aesthetically look very good. They churn out lots of content because it's easy to if you're AI. And then people are drawn in, and increasingly brands are now using AI influencers for their own content, because guess what? It's cheaper than using a human. It's easier than using a human, and they can churn it out at scale. So you've actually recognized something that's becoming very much mainstream, which again opens up a whole can of worms of, are we really going to be influenced by AI avatars? And the answer is, well, yes, we already are.
Yeah, and there's a funny conversation too when it comes to the kind of ethics and the morals of finfluencers, so to speak. Like, I'm a musician, I'm a guitar player, so I follow quite a lot of guitar players on Instagram, like your Johnny Mars, what have you. And I've been seeing more increasingly in recent years, you have these kind of AI influencers who are, in my case, they're with a guitar, they're playing guitar, whatever, but they are posing as real people. They're not they're kind of hiding the fact that it is an AI influencer. What are the kind of moral obligations of that?
Well, the number one moral obligation is transparency with your audience, that if you're using AI, you disclose it and you label it as AI generated content. We know that the social networks, now when you go to post your Instagram reel or your carousel, there is a little button that says AI content, and you have to turn it on. And if you don't, in many cases, the algorithms will detect that it's AI generated and might kind of shadow ban your content. However, the other side of the ethics and the morals of it is, if we're not transparency, then that damages trust. But some people are commercializing their AI content and their AI avatars. And so, they're winning, and there is a whole cohort of people who are happy to receive and engage with that content, because the currency on social is attention.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And definitely, as you said there, is it over 25 million AI accounts on Instagram alone?
Yeah, I think it's over 50. Over 50 million.
God.
Yes.
I suppose my next question when it comes to parasocial relationships and the relationships that we as online users have with AI chatbots is, I suppose the obvious question is, what is the harm? if any?
Well, Michael, humans are difficult. I will agree with you on that one. And not all humans agree with me. And when we go to a chatbot, they are designed to be what's called sycophantic, to be agreeable, to mirror your thoughts, your ideas, maybe your ideologies. So we're being sucked in to conversations that you could argue are one-sided and people are just agreeing with us. So the harm is if you become uber reliant on an AI chatbot for conversation around maybe how you're feeling, maybe the relationships that you're having with the humans in your life, and you're choosing that over having those conversations with a real person, you may get a false sense of reality, a false sense of security, and it might diminish your human skills, your emotional intelligence skills, your critical thinking skills to actually live in the real world. And you might actually become detached from reality. And I know, listen, I'm very good at compartmentalizing things in my life, but, I'd often give myself a shake and go, you got to deal with things as they come because those things never go away. So if we've got an AI chatbot who's saying, yeah, Joanne, you're right, you're great, I agree with you, is it doing me any service in the long run? It's fine to get advice. We've all done it, but becoming reliant, I think there's a kind of line that we don't want to cross.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's about what the lessons we can learn from these parasocial relationships, right? Because I know we discussed on the show this time last year about when OpenAI had updated ChatGPT to stop being so therapeutic when it came to people, because people were starting using it as a form of online therapy, right? And I also seen a story only recently about an individual from the States who claimed that, people were after him, and that came about as a result of him having this parasocial relationship with an AI bot. So what lessons can we learn from those kind of stories, albeit quite extreme stories? But what kind of lessons can we learn in regards to how we approach our communications with AI and these parasocial relationships?
Well, they easily can become addictive. It's free to use ChatGPT. You don't need to pay. Our smartphone is the one thing that we own that is the most personal item to us because it knows what we think, it knows how we feel, because we're putting it into social, we're putting it into Google, and increasingly we're putting it into AI chatbots. And that gives it a lot of control and a lot of power. And I think the big lesson is remember, data is what fuels AI. We become the product. So not only are we endangering ourselves of becoming over reliant, but we're also giving potentially our agency over to these AI models, and they are then harvesting all of that data to then potentially sell it on to companies who can then target us with ads. Because remember, ads are eventually going to come to the likes of ChatGPT.
And how can we, as you said there about these kind of big companies selling our information, selling our data, what can we do to protect ourselves from that?
Well, put boundaries in place. Decide for yourself what you're going to tell or share with AI models. If you're paying for models and you're paying a subscription, make sure that you turn off the setting where it says you cannot use my information to train the model. And also remember that we are the product. Our data, anything that we put in or upload, that is a commodity and that is of high value to these companies.
Joanne Sweeney, thank you so much, as always, for joining us here every Thursday for our digital download. Just before I let you go and we tell listeners more about the Digital Training Institute, a kind of final question I have here. Again, this conversation about parasocial relationships, and particularly when it comes to AI chatbots, kind of sparked a conversation here with me and my colleagues here in the office. And one of them brought up a really interesting point, which was when we think of parasocial relationships, and especially how they're depicted in media, we tend to lean in the more extreme, kind of oddly romantic relationships that people tend to have with these chatbots. But a very interesting point that one of my colleagues brought up is what this can look like in the future. Because, for example, could there be a future perhaps where, kind of like how I mentioned there about Hollywood, bringing back deceased actors, where we kind of have these parasocial relationships with AI mimicking our deceased loved ones? What do you think the future looks like?
Oh my goodness me, what an existential question. I know that, we have somewhat of a loneliness epidemic, and that is maybe driving romantic parasocial relationships. But actually, it's interesting that your colleague says that, because we can use tools like Midjourney to use old photographs of maybe loved ones that are deceased to kind of bring them back to life. And hands up, I have done it, and I've shown it at a few presentations that I've done, whereby, somebody that is no longer with us, I can now animate and turn that photo into a mini animation or a 5-second video, and it looks like they're alive. I think that I would, from my own point of view, hope that people can distinguish between reality and fantasy and try not to be brought into it. But I suspect that is a real possibility. But yeah, human connection, I guess, is more important than ever before.
And especially, that human connection. I think that's one of the great things about having you here every week for our digital download, is providing that information for people to kind of, fact check these things, look at what's happening online in a different lens. And maybe avoid some of these more extreme parasocial relationships that can get us into deep, deep trouble. Joanne Sweeney of the Digital Training Institute, thank you so much, as always, for joining me here on Good Morning Dublin. If any of our listeners want to connect with you, learn more about your podcast, your book, where can they go to connect with you, Joanne?
Go to digitaltraining.ie or search for AI6, the podcast, on your favorite podcast platform.
Brilliant stuff. And just to end on, speaking of parasocial relationships, how's AI Jane going?
Oh my goodness, her voice is being trained. Maybe I can introduce her to your listeners over the next couple of weeks. And she's a conversational AI chatbot now, and I'm training her on my work. Her voice still isn't 100%, but she's improving.
Oh, brilliant. Well, maybe we'll get her on the show sometime. We'll get AI Jane on the show.
And we will obviously flag for full transparency that she is a chatbot.
Of course. Thank you so much, Joanne.